Church has been an important factor in American lives since its founding, but there's no denying that church attendance has been on the decline in the last few decades. However, in the last few years, church has seen a little bit of a revival, especially among the young adult Gen Z generation. And in the wake of the Charlie Kirk assassination, I'm hearing that more and more churches are seeing new attendees. Now, among those attendees, I'm sure are people who attended church in their youth, got away from it, and are now rediscovering it as an adult. However, I'm sure that there are people out there who have never attended church in their lives, have no experience with it whatsoever, but are maybe interested in getting involved in a church. I'm here to speak to those people today because that was my childhood. In childhood, I never attended church. That was not something my family did, even though we were Christian. And I had to explore and discover church for myself as an adult. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit of the process, a little bit of things I've learned along the way, and hopefully make that a little less intimidating for you. Greetings and welcome to Community Centered, where we talk about what community is, why community matters, why you matter to community, and most importantly, how to start cultivating it wherever you are right now. I'm Ellie Whittekins, and I did not grow up with a church community. We did not attend church at all when I was a child, and I probably was never in a church unless it was for a funeral or a wedding. So when it came to adulthood, when I started maybe thinking about church a little bit more, I was exposed to people who had been in church, and I liked them as people, and they spoke highly of the church, so I became interested in maybe attending. I was really intimidated by it because, I grew up Christian, so I knew that there were certain traditions and certain things within service, um, but I didn't know what those things were. I had no experience with it, so I didn't know exactly how things went, and that really intimidated me. I'm the type of person that really likes to know the game plan. So when I first became interested, this was actually back in college, I had a couple of college friends and a couple of high school friends that I actually went around and I did explore a few churches. Now, at the time, I was not interested in being very seen, so I really went towards like big churches where you could kind of just be there anonymously. There were a couple of churches that we attended that were very small, and I felt so, what's the word? I felt so awkward there. I wasn't judged in the sense that they were judging me, but I felt very, yeah, I didn't feel comfortable necessarily because of the people. I didn't feel comfortable because of me, because I didn't feel comfortable really being seen and really talking to people or people knowing me. I guess you could call that just social awkwardness, but that was not really something I was looking for. So I was looking for a larger church. Like I said, I tried many different churches, never really found one to stuck with, and my work schedule changed and I no longer had Sundays free, so I just kind of left it at that. So that was my journey, 1920. I went into a few churches, and really after that I stopped. Even once I moved and I had a job that didn't require me to work on Sundays, I didn't go back. I started searching for a church again in, I must have been about 30 at the time, and this time I was looking for something different. At this point, I was in my journey of trying to build community for myself. And a big thing that people talk about in terms of their community is their community at church. So I started looking for a church. And in this case, that changed what I was looking for from wanting to go to a church where I'm anonymous to wanting to go to a church where I did have friends, where I did know people, where people would know my name and would know some things about me. So I was definitely looking for a community church and for a church family, as they say. How I went about finding my church is very similar to how I think most people would go about finding a church today. I went on Google and I typed in churches near me. A lot of them popped up, and I spent quite a lot of time going to different websites, looking at their statement of faith, looking at what they believed. This is actually a really important part of the process in terms of you should know what the church believes. You should know you should make sure that it is a church that is teaching the Bible, that believes the Bible is the Word of God, because if a church doesn't believe that, then how are they really teaching the Christian faith? I mean, everything kind of rests on that. So, most important factor when looking for that. But the problem is when you Google a lot of things, you get a lot of results. There were a lot of churches that met those criteria, and I didn't really have a good method of choosing a church. So I did that, and I kind of overwhelmed myself for a couple weeks and didn't really have the energy to continue. And honestly, the way I ended up picking my church is I go by a church twice a day. It's on my commute from home to work and from work back home. And they have a sign out front. And I was just looking at the church one day. I was like, you know what? Let's just look them up. And they met all of my criteria in terms of a faith statement. And I just went ahead and emailed them and contacted them and asked about getting involved, which I'll get to that in a minute. But it worked better as a method for me in terms of choosing a place that kind of looked interesting, that was on my way back and forth from work, that I go by. And maybe I was led by God. I would just say my curiosity was piqued, and I looked at it and I said, you know what, let's just jump in. No more research, no more Googling. Let's just jump in and we'll try it out. And if it doesn't work for me, then I can go back to Google searching, right? Google will still be there, but let's just try this one. Let's just make a decision and try it out. Now, in terms of how I started, I will say again, church service was really intimidating for me because I know there are traditions. And once again, I've been in a few churches before. Sometimes you have the hymn books, and sometimes, you have this really back and forth type of service where you're kind of back and forth singing and you have to find things in a hymn book. I've gone to a couple of those churches. I'm really glad that my church is not one of those churches. In terms of like things that intimidated me about church, locating things in the Bible is one of them because I didn't grow up in church, so navigating the Bible is a little different. I don't necessarily have muscle memory of, oh, this is kind of over in this direction, this is kind of over here. And the Bible's a big book, so it's easy for me to get lost if I don't know exactly where I'm at. So that was intimidating. It was intimidating to me just not knowing the stories as well as other people. When you're talking to people who are 50, 60 years old who have been in church their whole lives, they catch references and catch names, and someone can say something about, this reminds me of the story of, someone who is referenced in the Old Testament, and I'm just sitting there going, I don't know who this person is. And other people are agreeing with them, and I'm like, I don't know. So things like that really intimidated me. And so did actually like going to service and just not knowing what to do when. So when I contacted my church about wanting to get involved, wanting to start this journey, I asked them about joining, well, I said Bible study. So there's a couple different things within church, and I'm going to explain this now. There are Bible studies where it is more of a classroom setting in the sense of you're being taught. And then there are small groups or growth groups where it's a little bit more of, it's directed, but it's people are talking and having a discussion about it. So I had contacted the church about maybe getting involved in a Bible study, and I ended up with an invitation to join one of their small groups, which was so beneficial to me. And I wanted that kind of setting because I figured I've been in college, I've been in book clubs. Having a setting where you're sitting around talking to other people or learning something was very approachable to me, where service didn't feel very approachable to me. So I decided to kind of test the waters that way. So I ended up joining this growth group and getting to know some of the people there and just starting to learn a little bit of the Bible and get some of those stories more ingrained in me because we're reading them and we're studying them. So that is what I did for the first year and a half. I got involved with a small group and I just kind of hung out there, got to know people, got to be comfortable in the space. After a year and a half, I decided I was ready to attend service. And for that, I kind of did two things. One of my friends from my growth group invited me. She said, anytime you want to attend, let me know. You can sit with us. And that was a really big thing for me. Not having to go and feel awkward sitting in a pew alone. I mean, we don't really have like pews, we have rows of chairs, but you get the idea. Like, not having to sit alone, not kind of standing around awkwardly, not knowing what's going to happen. That was a really big thing, just feeling included. And I definitely recommend to anyone inviting someone to church. That is a huge help. Huge, huge help. And growth group gave me the opportunity to make those friendships. I didn't have any friendships outside that allowed me that. So it was really wonderful to have that from growth group and be able to grow into going to service. The other thing I did was I watched a service online. Can't remember if I watched one or two, and it really shouldn't take more than one or two. Like I said, I'm the type of person that kind of likes to know what the flow is going to be and a little bit of knowing what I'm walking into and what might be required of me in this. And was very happy to see that my church basically has everything on display. So there's no point in service where I'm flipping through a Bible, and there's no point in service where I'm flipping through a hymn book. And we have more modern songs anyway. So when the band is playing, the words are up on the screen for me to sing, and I don't have to worry about not knowing a song that everyone else knows, which is so important. You know how things just feel socially awkward sometimes. I really didn't want that to happen. And same thing with my pastor. Whenever he is, giving the sermon, the quotes and everything are on the screen. I happen to pick up from growth group of just taking notes on things. I will tell you, some people take notes during service, some people don't. Do not feel pressured if you see a bunch of people taking notes that you have to take notes. I take notes because I've just learned from college it sticks with me better. I rarely go back and read the notes from church, but it sticks with me better if I'm also writing as I do this. Also, my church has a church-wide series, so the sermon on Sunday is what we talk about in growth group during the week. So sometimes having those notes is just helpful because you can reference back to it in growth group. Doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes that is helpful. So that's a little bit of what my journey has looked like. And I just want to wrap up this video with a few pieces of advice, wisdom that I've learned along the way, and things that have really worked for me. So hopefully this helps you on your journey. My first piece of advice would be let people know where you are at. If you're going to a church for the first time, there's always greeters at the door. You can let them know, hey, I'm new. Where do I go here for service? Who can kind of show me around? That's a possibility if you want to start right out with service. Like I said, I was interested in getting to know maybe a small group of people, and I emailed the pastor and said, this is where I'm at. I didn't go to church as a child. I'm looking into it now as an adult. I don't really know how to start, but is there a small group that I can get involved with? And that also avoided for me having to report it to the pastor when I first showed up, of if he had asked well, where did you go to church before? It is always maybe a little awkward explaining that story. A lot of people in my church are a little older, so my story looks very different from theirs because they went to church as a child. That was something that their family did. And maybe they've left that church and gone to a few different ones or been in different denominations. I find that that's a very common story for them. And having to explain that I grew up Christian but didn't go to church is always a little awkward, but I'm not as self-conscious about it as I used to be. So, first piece of advice is let people know where you're at. My second piece of advice is make sure that the church uses the Bible. Make sure that it states on their website that they believe that the book is the word of the Lord. Make sure that they don't go about changing things such as God's pronouns, and make sure that when they are either teaching in growth groups or preaching a sermon on Sunday mornings, that they are referencing the Bible, that they are quoting it, that they are reading passages from it, and passages, not a quick 2-sentence verse, actually reading sections of it so you can get the whole view of it. Very important. Honestly, there's no point in being a part of calling yourself a Christian, being a part of the Christian faith, if you're not using the Bible, because that is what everything is based on. My third piece of advice would be go in person. You know, we're in a digital world. You can absolutely sit at home and watch all of the sermons online, but honestly, you are not getting the full effect of it. Part of church is building a church community, is getting involved with people, is getting to know people. And honestly, if you've taken a look at what this channel on YouTube is called, I'm all about building community here. It is so important to our lives that we build community. So, really going to encourage you. The videos are great if you're sick or maybe out of town and want to catch up on the sermon. It's great that we have access to those things. But if you are able bodied, you really should be going to church and meeting people and building those connections. You're not really getting the full value of church if you're not. Also, I would say, like, when you're getting involved with church, try to find some things that you could do, some service. One of my friends from church, her and her husband are there almost every day of the week helping out. So a lot of times she pulls me into activities she's doing, which I love because I do enjoy serving my church. And sometimes I don't really have a lot of time to do it because I'm still working during the week. So today, actually, after service, they're folding boxes. So it's that time of year where we're getting little shoe boxes to put together for Christmas because we have to have them back by the end of November to ship out. So, you know, the boxes come flat and you have to fold them, kind of like pizza boxes. You have to fold them and assemble them. So she pulled me into that after service today, and we spent maybe 10-15 minutes doing that, just helping them get ready for this season. And that was wonderful. So look for ways that you can help out, look for ways to get connected and to be involved. My fourth piece of advice would be try things a little outside your comfort zone. Now, obviously, when I first started going to church, even just going into a church for a small group was outside my comfort zone. And then again, a year and a half later, when I started attending service, it was a little outside my comfort zone. But there are other things that I've been really excited to get involved with church for. I've really been excited to start going to church picnics. I was really excited being able to attend Christmas Eve service. I was not so excited to attend Good Friday service. That was outside of my comfort zone. I knew from what people had told me that it was going to be very different than a normal service, and that maybe it was a little somber. Maybe I don't know. It's a very difficult topic to go through in the first place, but I knew it was going to be different. And I knew it was going to be hard, and also it was on a Friday. It was after a not just a long day at work, but a whole long week of work. And I made that decision kind of spur of the moment of, you know what, I'm just going to go. And I'm so glad I did. It was really amazing. Yes, it was somber, but it was really amazing. And I plan to go now as often as I possibly can. And this is another thing where having a friend is really helpful, especially a friend who knows where you're at. So during Good Friday service, we take communion, but it's not our typical way of taking communion. So usually, when you take communion in my church, we do it once a month. You'll just come in, and on every chair there's the little plastic that has the juice in one end and the little wafer in the other. Um, and you know, we just take it in our seats. It's very easy, very approachable. During Good Friday, we actually line up, and one by one, the pastors give us that, and they say something, and I can't remember the exact words, but they say something, and you take it, and you're supposed to actually respond to them and say something. And none of this is explained other than this is how we're going to empty out the rows and come up and take communion and everything. And so grateful for my friend who was sitting next to me that let me know this is what you're supposed to say when they hand you that. You know, that's just really helpful because if I had found that out later, I would have been really embarrassed. Um, so, really, you need to be creating those connections there, do things a little outside your comfort zone. And my fifth piece of advice is that it usually takes a few tries, a few visits before you get comfortable. My number is always three. You know, it takes 3 visits to get comfortable somewhere. It took 3 small groups before I didn't feel like I stuck out like a sore thumb there. It took 3 visits for me to feel when I was going there on Sunday service like I kind of knew where to go and maybe I didn't feel like everyone was looking at me. So oftentimes it takes 3 visits. That's kind of the hump that you have to get over. And by the fourth time, you're like, I got this. This isn't something I need to be anxious about anymore. So hang in there, keep working at it. I hope these pieces of advice have been helpful to you and to your journey. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below and join me here next time for further discussion on how to build your community here and now.